I wish I was an attorney a lot of the time. I never expected that I would wish that. I'm a livestock rancher. Both of my grandparents had ranches 8 miles apart on Rosebud Creek. I was raised there, about 10 miles southeast of Colstrip, where I went to grade school and high school. And after high school, I went to Montana State before it became a university. And I have a degree in zoology that helps me, supposed to help me understand animals. And because I took the wrong course, my junior year, I ended up with a minor in chemistry, which has helped me a little bit dealing with coal. I am a charter member, past chairman of the Northern Plains Resource Council. I am a recovering Republican, mostly 95% because of coal development and the conservatives' lack of concern about things that should concern conservatives, like property rights. 1969 was the first time I ever heard of the Tongue River Railroad. Is anybody here from Bozeman? Close? Livingston? Well, I'm mad at you already, but for a couple of reasons. The main one being the Crown Butte gold mine. It was a disaster. A bunch of gold mining claims were lumped together. Company came in, was going to develop them, use cyanide leach heap that surely would have had the same results as the cyanide leach thing at Zortman Landusky up in northeastern Montana that's polluted the Fort Peck Reservation up there endlessly. And the proposal was at the head of Soda Butte Creek, which runs into the Lamar River, which is in Yellowstone Park, and everybody with a grain of sense in their head said, absolutely not, we are not going to ruin Yellowstone Park. So the federal government went in and bought out all of the mining claims. Everybody ended up with money and with greenbacks instead of gold money. Problem solved, except the state of Montana then went to the federal government and said, whoa, wait a minute. We were going to get a bunch of jobs. We were going to get a bunch of taxes. We were going to get a bunch of employment. And you took that away from us. And we need something to replace that, something in lieu of the gold mine that was going to make us all kinds of money. So the federal government said, what do you want? And they said, well, we want something that's worth a lot. So they offered, the feds offered the state, I think, 13, 18 something million dollars, and the state said, no, that's not good enough. What we would really like would be some federal coal somewhere where we could get a coal mine. So the federal government said, okay. So they found some coal surrounded by the Custer Forest, which incidentally is off limits to mining on Otter Creek. That would have necessitated a railroad that we have been fighting from another mine, the Montco mine, which was scrapped. The state finally pulled the permit for lack of diligence because they never could get the investment together to open the mine. But the railroad was sitting there with a permit to go from the Montco mine, which is close to Bernie, Montana. I'm going to test your Montana geography here, I think. From Bernie, Montana to Miles City. That Montco mine then would supply coal to coal-fired units in the upper Midwest somewhere. Railroad was never built. The Montco mine was a bad idea to begin with. It lost its permit. But all of a sudden, we have a new mine, the Otter Creek. One of the reasons that the Montco mine wasn't developed is there's terrible toxic overburden there. High sodic spoils. Normally, when they mine, like my hometown of Colstrip, they take a drag line in, they take the overburden off, they take a little topsoil off, they take the overburden out, they dump it in a pile, they take the coal out, they re-level the spoil material, put the topsoil back on and blend. The overburden material at the Montco mine was so toxic that they said you're going to have to insulate the groundwater, which is the coal as the aquifer, and the surface, both. So you've got to have some neutral material close to the coal, where the coal was, and you have to have some neutral material close to the surface. In order to do that, you can't use a drag line, you have to use a truck and shovel. So you judge what kind of material this is, and you put it in a truck, and the truck either go to the top or go to the bottom, or it goes to the middle. Terribly complicated mine plan. That's why they couldn't get the financing for it. So that went by the way. But we've still got the railroad with a permit. The Montco mine is gone, but we are in the process now of doing EISs and studying the Otter Creek mine. It's a nightmare, but it represents the same old thing, taxes, jobs, and the reason I'm mad at Livingston and Park County is I live EOB, okay? EOB stands for East of Billings. Nothing counts. Nothing matters east of Billings. You can do any damn thing you want to. And if you have laws, if you have regulations, they are ignored. If the Otter Creek mine is developed, the coal will go to China. If the Tongue River Railroad is built to take the coal to China, we aren't going to go to Miles City anymore, although we had an interminable scoping hearing about that route. And we gathered all kinds of testimony and things like that. And then after that was over, we decided we have a new route. And we are going to go to Colstrip. So the ranch that my son and I are on, instead of having 4 miles of railroad going down Tongue River, we are going to have 9 miles of railroad going right through our place. And the way you do that is you go to the Surface Transportation Board and you sell them a bill of goods, and they issue a permit that acknowledges public convenience and necessity, and they condemn our land. And we don't think much of that. And so we hire attorneys, like this one right here, to try and say, it doesn't seem to us like the requirement for public convenience and necessity is satisfied if you're going to ship the damn coal to China. And in the first place, maybe it's not right for a private, for-profit corporation, the Tongue River Railroad, to condemn private land. I can see a highway. We never would have built the interstate system had it not been for the right for federal government to go in and condemn land. It's tough to build a transmission line, but it's wrong, I think, to condemn our land. We've been there, both sides of my family, both grandparents have been there since the 1880s, and maybe that doesn't amount to much. But there's a whole agricultural culture, and we have been contributing to the United States ever since before there was a state of Montana. And all of a sudden, somebody's going to come in and really, really cramp our ability to do that. I'm going to get back to Livingston, because our senator Bacchus went to the Bozeman Pass area one time between your place and the one over the hill. And they were going to have perhaps some coal bed methane developed. We were having it where we, EOB. And the people there got all torn up just like we do. And so they went to Senator Bacchus and said, we don't want that. He said, you're right. This is ludicrous. This is a beautiful country. Look at the homes around here. Look at the mountain view vistas, the Bridger ski run that's just across the divide there. I mean, this is lovely, lovely country. And there was a coal mine here at one time, but it was an underground mine, and one day they were digging coal and they ran into a stone wall, and there had been a fall, and they didn't know where the coal went. So the town that was there at Trail Creek disappeared. There were several thousand people there. When I was in college, I used to go out there with a girlfriend. She took art, and she would paint, and I would look for relics in this abandoned town.
Where is that? Where is that town?
It's going down from the Bozeman Pass to Bozeman
Pass?
on the left, on the south. Okay. There is an exit there.
Just no town anymore.
No.
Just like what is it, Bear Creek that used to have a mine around Red Lodge? Right.
Yeah, and you know where they moved from Bear Creek to?
Well, they literally picked up and moved houses from Bear Creek to Red Lodge and dumped them with no foundations.
And then do you know where they moved from Red Lodge?
Where?
Coldstream.
Oh, wow.
Because they were underground mines. They were too dangerous. They killed, half the Yugoslavs in the whole Western world at Bear Creek. So they moved to Coldstream and opened a strip mine in 1923.
And you're EOB, so they're still
EOB, yeah, hell yes.
Well, and this gets us to.
But Bacchus says, we are not going, as long as there's a breath in my body, we're not going to have coal bed methane development in the Bozeman Pass area. Why destroy a beautiful place like this? But we have laws, and I think we can have all kinds of coal bed methane development down in southeastern Montana, EOB, and that will be fine. It's a wreck. It's a train wreck. They have polluted Tongue River so bad that we're having problems growing alfalfa. We really are. And does anybody care? No.
So the law we're relying on at this point is the National Environmental Policy Act.
NEPA.
NEPA. This is I actually brought it for you tonight. It's a relatively short law compared to some of these. And I don't like to haul around this giant book. But it's at 42 USC 4321. And you can get just a look at the headings. It's relatively brief. Policies and goals. It sets up the Council on Environmental Quality at the White House. And it is a procedural statute. There are no requirements for mediation. Unlike the Endangered Species Act, if you find out some kind of damage is going to be done under NEPA, that doesn't automatically mean that anything has to be done about it. But the study has to be performed. And I gave you the Citizen's Guide to NEPA. Did that raise questions at all? It's more detailed. I have just a short PowerPoint that I got from the Bureau of Reclamation that runs through the main points of NEPA, just to make sure we know what we're talking about as we get into this. Let's see if it'll forward. So this covers nice little presentation on what NEPA does, what it doesn't do, and how you comply with it. And the process can be relatively brief. It can last a year or two, or in some cases it's gone on for years and years as issues that hadn't been anticipated at the outset of the NEPA review take place. The really important thing, and this is what has evolved along the proposed Tongue River Railroad routes, is that NEPA requires agency and public participation. It requires tribal participation if there's going to be a tribal impact. There has to be disclosure about action alternatives. A no action alternative is required to be considered. It's in there. It's lame, but it's in there. And environmental effects. And the environmental effects are increasingly including concepts that weren't really in anybody's mind when NEPA was originally passed in 1969. Environmental justice issues now have to be considered. There's some good guidance from the Council on Environmental Quality about how environmental justice being in general, the impacts on low-income communities, communities of color, rural communities that are disproportionately affected by projects that have environmental impacts, and it's beginning to be an academic field. Yeah, Clarissa.
Does it cover just mining, or is it oil and gas as well? Is it just coal mining?
It covers, and we'll get into exactly what requires NEPA analysis, but it is any major federal action, including a permitting action, which is how a lot of private parties get tied up with NEPA, that will have a significant impact on the environment. And that's in the big heavy book. And so there are requirements for hearings, there are opportunities for public comment. The structure of the act allows for public input, but on the back end, there's been all this input and all this study, and on the back end, you don't necessarily get any mitigation, mediation. Nothing is necessarily changed by the fact that all this information has been brought forward. The idea was that once we knew and understood the severity of the impacts, we would do something rational about that.
Can I give an example?
Go ahead.
Herb Alderson, rancher, Bernie. If the railroad would have gone through his place, Herb's observation was, I have a bull pasture. It has two things in it. It has feed, forage, and it has water. The two things that those bulls need. If the railroad goes through, I get two pastures, one with feed in it and one with water in it, but neither has both. Okay.
And this is arguably an environmental justice issue that I don't think has been properly considered. I'm always looking for good things to write law review articles about, and I think that the impacts, the way that the environmental justice movement could fold in disproportionate impacts on rural communities has not been fully considered. It's not part of the literature. If anybody's looking for a paper topic, I've got a few in here. I'll keep throwing them out. Yeah, and so what NEPA doesn't do is tell us what to do or tell us what we have to do. It doesn't prevent the impacts, and it doesn't in any way guarantee a decision that's going to please everyone, anyone. It's an information dump more than anything. And there's also no prohibition that comes out of NEPA. Now, sometimes another act will be triggered. Sometimes it will become apparent through the NEPA analysis that there will be severe water quality or air quality impacts, or some kind of endangered species will be affected in its critical habitat. And that could actually have the effect of forestalling certain actions. But NEPA itself doesn't have teeth like that. So you get 3 levels of analysis. First, you could potentially have a categorical exclusion. It's possible that whatever the action is just doesn't have any demonstrable environmental impacts. So you just set it aside and it's not necessary to go any farther. You might have an environmental assessment, which is referred to as an EA. And by doing the threshold environmental assessment, you might be able to get to a finding of no significant impact, or a FONSI, which also means you set aside the NEPA process, you're done, and you move forward, and that's the final agency action. And then the third option, which gets you to, this is actually a really light EIS in my experience. They can fill shelves.
We've had several updates, so
Yeah, this is
there's additional.
kind of a moment in time.
Yeah.
So the EIS involves, what it currently involves out in Rosebud County, I think a little bit in Powder River County as well, is an external consultant to the Surface Transport Board sending in biologists and other consultants who are filling out the required data sections for the EIS. So just what it sounds like, the categorical exclusion is for actions that individually or cumulatively don't have an environmental impact. So it's not enough that it doesn't affect this little area that you're looking at. One of the big arguments over the Tongue River Railroad has been whether the impacts of the Otter Creek mine ought to be considered as well. Because if the railroad doesn't go in, the mine can't operate, it has nowhere to ship its coal. So do you consider just the railroad, or do you consider the railroad and the mine? Do you consider the railroad and the mine and the port expansions and the global warming impacts of eventually burning the coal in China? And you can imagine how people would differ about what ought to be included. So that's the categorical exclusion. The EA addresses actions that could be major, and that's the jurisdictional threshold. It has to be a major federal action, and that could be anything from a permit issued by the highway department, the federal highway department, or EPA. But it's at that point where you might get to the FONSI finding, and then that's the end of the agency's responsibility. And
What's FONSI?
The finding of no significant impact.
Finding of those.
So there are clear steps outlined in the regulations implementing NEPA for the EA. And I've put this slideshow in the supplemental materials on D2L, so you don't feel like you have to write down every word. But bless you.
Thank you.
This is a Bureau of Reclamation slideshow, so they take as an example modifications made to dams. And who's studying the Columbia River? Is that you, Jody? Yeah. So really anything you do with the dam is going to have significant impacts on water quality and fisheries. And so that's the sort of thing that would tend to trigger an NEPA analysis pretty frequently. So the EA, it's kind of an EIS light. You're just trying to get to the point where you decide whether you need the full EIS or whether you can issue the FONSI. And there's just a nice little summary on this PowerPoint. So it gets you to the place where you could identify possible mitigations so that there wouldn't be any significant impact, or decide that you do need to go ahead and perform the EIS and get the broader set of information that will deal with a significant impact. And then you hit the full EIS, which is the luxury NEPA experience. And it can go on, as the Tongue River evaluation has, for decades. One will get done and the project will change and the economics will change and there will be a challenge and something will get remanded, and they literally can just drag on and on. So it's a similar preparation process to the EA, but you get these, and this has all happened again pretty recently, and you may have seen some of these steps in the Gazette as they've gone forward over the last year or so. There have been scoping hearings, there have been news releases, there's been a lot of activity by the consultants out along the route, looking at wildlife habitat and archaeological sites, and that's likely to continue for the next year or so before they get to the stage where they put out a draft EIS. That will get public comment. There will be further public meetings. It will all get turned into a final EIS that will have similar review. And then once there's a final agency action, final approval of that final EIS, then there's an opportunity for challenge by anybody who feels that the process is incomplete. Because it's not so much that there's a conclusion at the end. You can't say, well, the EIS says we should do this and that's wrong, because the EIS doesn't. The EIS is just, here's what we might expect to happen. And in the case I assigned to you for tonight, Northern Plains versus the Surface Transport Board, the argument was, how would you characterize the argument that Northern Plains was making? What was wrong with the NEPA process there? Well, thank you for your honesty.
Didn't know it was there, sorry.
Did anybody get through it? Well, we'll look at it for a minute here. Let's see. So the summary of the EIS is to get the information necessary for a decision maker, in this case the Surface Transport Board, to make a decision about what kinds of mitigations might be necessary, what routes will cause the least impact, whether not permitting the project is the best alternative. So it's relying on the good faith and good judgment of whoever the decision maker may be. And I also wanted to point out to you one government entity that's relatively new to me, that's out there, and I want to find out more about, is that this is mentioned in some of the EPA materials and Council on Environmental Quality materials. There's this Institute for Environmental Conflict Resolution. I think it's in Arizona. It's the Morris Udall Foundation, but it's somehow become part of the federal government. And they offer resources and environmental conflict resolution professionals for working through and resolving environmental conflicts. And as dysfunctional as the EIS process can be, I'd be very interested to know more about how this works and if it's been successful in some of these cases that they cite on their website. So this is another suggestion for a writing topic. Anybody who wanted to dig in and see if this Institute for Environmental Conflict Resolution is actually serving its purpose, I think you'd be doing me a favor. I'd like to know. And then I also assigned, did anyone get to the Judging NEPA reading? Okay, so the other reading assignment that was under NEPA for this week was this piece that came out of the Environmental Law Institute. I may have shown you some ELI materials in the past. They actually do a pretty good job at taking an objective look at what's happening with a lot of the environmental laws. I've done some of their trainings. And this particular piece I thought was really interesting because they look at the political affiliations of judges and panels of judges at the appellate level who have ruled on NEPA cases in recent years. And there are some very interesting charts. If you scroll down later in the Okay, so the NEPA filings, there was a whole lot of NEPA litigation early on, and it's come down a little, and it's starting to pop back up. And they never explain why there was this huge gap in the late 90s. I doubt that there were just no cases filed. There might have been some reason why they lacked data.
Government shutdown.
That's right. I'm going to blame everything on that.
You think that's funny?
Let's see. So they break down, they define pro-environment plaintiffs as plaintiffs who have some kind of environmental affiliation who are trying to, usually it's trying to prevent a project from going forward, but that's not necessarily true. There are some cases that are around urban redevelopment that we may be able to talk about. And the pro-development plaintiffs are usually industry and the people you would expect. And so they break down the success of NEPA cases. This is U.S. district courts, so at the trial court level, January 2001 to June 2004. So the Democratic appointees are far more likely than all judges as a group to rule in favor of the pro-environment plaintiffs, where on the other side, it's the Republican appointees who are about the same proportion likely to rule in favor of the pro-development plaintiffs, and then it just takes a dive as you go toward the other side of the political spectrum. And this is unusual. You don't see this kind of politicization of most of judicial rulings on most statutes. So the point that the ELI authors are making, and you look through a few more charts and it just bears out the same argument. Circuit courts, the appellate courts seem to be doing pretty much the same thing. ELI's argument is that something about NEPA and the way the case law has developed, the way our judiciary is developing, is showing these real political fault lines. This should not happen if you believe in the way our judiciary is theoretically supposed to work. The appointees should be reading the law, reading the precedent, and coming to something like a statistically consistent set of rulings on the issues, and instead it's this incredible bias developing, which is, it's really a problem if you're concerned about the credibility and the public faith in the judiciary. So that was, I just think those charts are mind-blowing as a member of the legal profession, so I wanted you to see that. And then we've got this Northern Plains case. And this is part of your assigned reading for tonight. So let's spend a few minutes going through it. You're about to take an exam that's going to be along these lines, looking at I tried to pick something relatively short. All the cases I was looking at were about 40 pages to start with, and I thought they're just going to leave. They're going to drop out tonight. So I've got you, I think it's 14 pages. It'll be manageable. But Northern Plains versus the Surface Transport Board, and they make it easy by including about half a dozen other petitioners, respondents, interveners. And this was submitted and argued in 2011, and the ruling came down in 2011. And this was over a previous incarnation of the EIS done on the Tongue River Railroad. The railroad was looking to construct these railroad lines, and the Surface Transport Board approved 2 applications, and the challenge came from Northern Plains, from Native Action, and I think there may have originally been an individual. Was Mark Fix involved with that? I feel like his name came up. Were you?
Roger 6,
Okay.
I think. There's Mark.
Yeah, there we go. So Mark Fix petitioners, Native Action. So yeah, just a United. The union was opposed, right? Yeah.
So how do you know who the plaintiff is?
So
That's the plaintiff.
Yeah, you got to go back up here to the parties all in bold. And those are the named parties that you're going to see up here on top in your case caption. And then the others are designated by the way they got involved. So Northern Plains was an original petitioner. They brought the challenge to the district court in Montana. Native Action was a petitioner intervener. So that means they didn't sign on to the original complaint. They filed a petition to intervene with the court after it was already docketed. Surface Transport Board are the respondents. So they were the ones that Northern Plains originally brought the case against. And then you've got Tongue River Railroad Company, responded intervener. So they jumped in and said, this concerns us, we want to be involved too. Then you've got Native Action, which was an original petitioner against the Surface Transport Board. And you've got UTU, the United Transport Union, and so this is their Montana State Legislative Board. It must have been a subcategory of UTU. So they're petitioners again here against the Surface Transport Board, and Tongue River Railroad jumped in on that as an intervener. And then there's a period. So we start again, and you realize that what's happened here is there were a whole bunch of different cases that got consolidated because we've got a lot of original petitioners, a lot of original respondents, and everybody then started jumping in and intervening in the different cases. And the court said, whoa, Nellie, let's have this all together. It's just way too confusing to try to decide these separately. So as you keep scrolling down, each time there's a period, like up there underneath respondent intervener, then you start reading again. And so this time it's Northern Plains, City of Forsyth, UTU, another UTU entity, Mark Fix, and then Native Action is the petitioner intervener, and they're all suing. Surface Transport Board and Tongue River Railroad intervenes in that one as well. And now it's all one case. And disposition is affirmed in part, reversed in part, and remanded. So it gets sent back to the district court for some part of the rulings. This is the Ninth Circuit. We're at the appellate level here. And the holdings are, this is actually really nicely written up. It makes it very clear what happened. Northern Plains and its fellow petitioners won on their argument that the Surface Transport Board failed to take the hard look required at certain material environmental impacts required by NEPA. So they had not performed the full NEPA analysis as required. They won on that. They won on their argument that STB had relied on insufficient information, but STB won on its argument that, on its finding that there was a clear public need or demand for the railroad lines. And then this final one was regarding the safety concerns that came up before the second line was approved. So this is about a third application that should not have been approved before additional information was considered. And this arbitrary and capricious language is the standard for review under the Administrative Procedure Act that we've talked about a few times. It's normally how you get a court to look at an agency's final decision under most of the environmental laws, but not always. There are some laws, like the surface mining law that we're going to talk about next week, that allows a citizen to go straight to court and say the agency has a mandatory non-discretionary duty and they're not doing it. And we want the court to reach out and force them to do it. And the only analysis is, does the duty exist and are they doing it? You don't get anything else. You don't get review of the agency's thinking or any deference to the agency's decision-making process. If there's the duty and they're not doing it, that's the end of the story. But it's rare when you get a fact pattern like that. Okay, so those are the main things I wanted to get through with you, just so you're clear on NEPA. And we're 6:45, so now we have some time to talk about what's really interesting about this, which is how the environmental impact statement process has been rolling over Rosebud County for the last 30 years. So how should we do this? You want to just tell us a little about how this got started and what it's been like?
It's endless. You have no idea how many hearings we have gone to, how many misconceptions we've tried to clear up when we finally get a draft. People in Washington, D.C. do not understand how a ranch works. They assume that if you put a culvert, a cattle pass, they call it, it's a concrete dome-shaped thing with a flat bottom. They assume that a cow will go through this. And where they plan on putting them, it's arbitrary on the part of the Surface Transportation, or before that, the ICC, Interstate Commerce Commission, who originally started this thing. We fought this whole battle once with the ICC, and then all of a sudden that didn't count, and now we're with the Surface Transportation Board. But they will say that we try to get a bridge, because a bridge is big and open and you can maybe get cattle to go through that. But, you know, and I write this testimony and say, a cow is not the smartest animal in the world, and she looks at this culvert thing that you say she's going to go through, and she thinks, I would fit on this end, but the far end down there is only about that big. And somewhere along the line, I'm going to get stuck, so I'm not going through it. Even though water might be over there, and I don't have any over here. And they write back in their handling of the comment, and they say, cattle will learn to go through a cattle pass. And so then I facetiously write them back and say, okay, you cowboys in Washington, D.C., when we get that bunch of cattle gathered up the first time, put them through your tube, I want you to show up riding your best horse, because we're going to need all the help we can get. And they don't understand in the first place, and they sure don't understand the joke. You know, they come back and say, we don't have horses. I told the railroad people one time, I said, okay, you want to build a railroad, build it anyway. You can come in with your scrapers and cats, and you can take your dirt and you can put it in the low places and take it off the high places. You can bring in your ballast. I wish you would treat it for noxious weeds, because it's coming from some place where there's leafy spurge and we don't have that. But bring in your ballast, bring in your ties, put your rails down. I'm not going to charge you anything. I only want one thing. And that's a place on our ranch where a cow can walk from here to there without going over a grade, under a grade, stepping on ties, or crossing railroad tracks. It's just a passage for cattle. And they say, well, how are we going to get our railroad, our choo-choo train from here to there if you've got a gap in there? And I said, okay, now you understand when we talk about isolation and severance, because you are severing us. And when they're constantly hinting at, well, you might as well just lay down and take it, because we have the right to condemn and we're going to use it. And if you want to get along with us, fine. But if you don't, you're going to wish you had.
So
I'm not answering your question.
Well, we got to talking about eminent domain a little on the phone earlier, and I'll go ahead and pass around the volumes, because it's especially helpful to look at the just the table of contents that lets you know everything that's in there. There's an attempt to be comprehensive, and this one needed to be a lot more comprehensive, but it's a big lift to produce everything, and it doesn't get to the bottom of a lot of the real issues. So right now there have been brush fires in recent years. There's been drought and a lot of damage to habitat. And the proposal is to do the entire biological analysis in under a year, which doesn't give much opportunity at all for recovery of potential critical habitat that has yet to be identified.
We had 500,000 acres burned, and they came in, and a lot of it is on the route. We lost 26 miles of fence, just for an example. We lost more than half of our summer pasture. We sold our calves 2 months early. We sold half of our cows. And the biologist, Amanda, came in and was going to do a biological survey on part of that burned. And we said, the fires have completely changed the biological composition of what you're looking at. There aren't any prairie dogs. They left. Don't know where they went, but there aren't any prairie dogs left. They're small animals. There aren't any. There aren't any grasshoppers. You know, there's all kinds of things. It's changed the complexion of the Tongue River. You're not going to get any baseline. You're not going to know what it was like before in order to compare what it's going to be like in the future. She agreed with us, but she said, I have to have my analysis done by August of 2013. It's over. And it's flawed. But they don't care. You know, they're like Max. They don't care. It's EOB. Anybody been to Cold Strip? It's a mess. It might look pretty good. I've got a cousin that's on the ranch I was raised on. The water is supposed to be restored. The spring that my dad homesteaded for that ranch, my cousin had 6 cows that went up and drank the water that's finally found its way through the soil material, drank the water, 6 of them died, just like that. And it wasn't in the EIS. And we predicted in the mining EIS that this was going to happen. You can't just put spoil material in and hope that the water makes its way through it and it's not going to be adversely affected.
So kind of going back in time, looking through it, this is the 92 draft environmental impact statement. This thing has gone through so many evolutions, and I'm a latecomer to it. There's so much that's gone on here that's news to me because I've only read the last couple of years' documents. It's a little incredible to me that there's not a hard end to the process. You don't get a proposal, an evaluation, and an up or down decision that just lets you know what's going to happen.
We have had this sword hanging over our head for 40 years. It's hard to run a ranch when you don't know what the future is going to bring as far as someone in Washington, D.C., or in St. Louis, or wherever, or Dallas, or wherever the head of the, wherever Warren Buffett lives. Omaha. It's hard to plan not knowing what they're going to do to our place.
So the green one you're looking at, that now says not Surface Transport Board, but Interstate Commerce
ICC.
Commission. Yeah, so that's from the previous version of the federal agency. And then this one actually dates, this is the 80s, this is the very first, yeah, I think this is the very first final EIS.
I went to Washington DC one time. Carrie, I don't know if you know this. I went to Washington DC one time and met with a board member of the ICC. Gus Owen was his name, and an attorney. And I said, you have granted a permit to the railroad. They are not building it. They keep talking about it. They have not acquired 1 acre of land to build this on. But they have a permit to build it. And it's not right for them to be able to hold our ranches hostage for years and years and years. And Gus Owen agreed with us. And the next time the guy behind the railroad, Mike Gustafson, went back there, they said, are you ever going to get this thing built? And he was looking for an extension. I don't know which one it was, but he said, if you grant me the extension that I'm asking for, I will have that railroad built and operating in 3 years. So they gave him the extension.
And this was what year?
Hell, I don't ask me what year ever. I was younger. They didn't build it. So Gus Owen moved, was seconded, the board accepted that they pulled the permit for lack of diligence. It was over. Finally, it was over. Gus Owen went off the board, a new lackey came on, they voted to rescind the last motion, and they gave him back the permit. That was the only solid decision that was ever made. I wasted a trip to DC, but I did eat some good crap.
Well, now you got your son to go for you. He's out there meeting with the STB, isn't he?
Huh?
Hasn't Clint been out there meeting with the STB?
What's the question?
Hasn't Clint been out there meeting with the STB?
Yeah,
I thought so. It becomes generational.
yeah.
So this is this is the final environmental impact statement from the first proposal. This is from around 80, I can't tell exactly when the thing was published. I think
Is it on the back? Is there a date on the mailing? No.
No. But it does say, it mentions a couple of dates in the 80s up front. So this is talking about route comparison. There's the coal strip alternative mentioned even back then, which is now the preferred alternative, but that's new. There was the Moon Creek alternative.
Still is.
Is that still on? Chung River Road alternate route.
That must be the Miles City one.
Old one. Okay.
But then they added to that, because then they put the route to Decker in, and that was going to cross Forest Mars. Do we know who Forest Mars is? Mars Bars, billionaire. What's the other? What are the other ones? Mars and Milky Ways and all of those. He bought a ranch at Verney, and one of the alternate routes crossed his ranch. And he fought it and fought it and fought it just like the rest of us did. And finally, in frustration, he bought his way into the railroad, bought out Gustafson, and then became a proponent of the railroad. He's a part owner now. I think he owns 30% of the railroad. So this is another manifestation. You know, our friends become our enemies, and it's just on.
And the proposal is.
And it's not even an alternative route now.
Really? So that's
No,
entirely
they're not
off
even
the table?
considering going through Mars's outfit.
Was that the route to Miles City?
No, this went out at Decker, went out to Sheridan, Wyoming.
Oh, okay, so down through.
And they had several manifestations of that. They had an approved route that went up Tongue River Canyon. And then the Burlington Northern came in, and they were not involved originally with the Tongue River Railroad. And they said, no, we don't want that route. We want a route that goes around the thing. So the Surface Transportation Board, or whoever it was at the time, said, okay, we'll give you that one instead. I mean, it's just,
So this one, I found the date, this is the 1985 final EIS produced by the Interstate Commerce Commission. And it just has the notice of the EIS being issued. This may have been prior to the public comment period. So the cooperating agencies at that time were USDA, the Army Corps of Engineers, the Federal Railroad Administration, Montana Department of State Lands, Custer County Planning Board, Powder River County Commission, and Northern Cheyenne Indian Tribe. And this was, it says an 89-mile line.
that's Montco Mine to Miles
Connect
City.
to Burlington River Line, yeah. Yeah, there's mention of Montco. So Montco is now a dead mine proposal, right? That's a little bit off to the east of the Creek tracks, northeast.
Mhm.
So this is not even really relevant to what's being proposed today, but the project just shifts across the land, and what's going to be mined changes, and what's, where the railroad might be changes.
Can't you argue with the Fourth Amendment language of the Constitution saying that this is, because you have a right to be securing your persons, and this is against unlawful search and seizure, but it's also protecting your rights to be securing your person, and you're not securing your person if they're holding to build railroads over your head, so it's affecting your livelihood and you're not saving your person. Couldn't you argue that?
So you're getting a little, this is what we were talking about.
And
earlier,
also,
you're getting a
since
little
corporations are
into these
considered
arguments.
people, now because the amendment itself doesn't say who, I mean, we assume police officers because that's what we use to enforce it, but since corporations are considered people, couldn't you say that they're affecting their things to be seized and whatnot?
Can't have it both ways. Can't be a person and a corporation, you can't have it both ways, is that what you're saying?
No, what I'm asking, I guess, rather weirdly, is a different interpretation of the Fourth Amendment to the Constitution, whether you can use that to apply it to your situation, saying that your persons are not being secure because the corporation's coming in trying to affect that.
Has
Because
to
the
have the
amendment
Constitution.
itself, like, we use that for the amendment for police enforcement to protect us from the law. However, couldn't this, since it doesn't specifically state who it's supposed to apply to, and since technically corporations are considered people, couldn't you make this argument that it's affecting your persons? I don't know, it's a stupid question, but.
So, no, I think
No,
what
no,
you're
no.
after is a due process argument, which is that no one shall be deprived
We will be compensated.
of liability or property without due process. And that flows into a takings argument. So when the government takes anything of value from the citizenry, there's a right to some sort of process before that happens and a right to compensation. And so eminent domain has become a serious part of the legal question associated with NEPA analysis here. Because if the certificate issues, then there will be proceedings in state court to enforce the eminent domain power given to the railroad by the Surface Transport Board. And we're not at that place yet, but eminent domain power has really taken a right-hand turn. Well, it's interesting. The Supreme Court has tilted more to the right politically in recent years, but eminent domain law seems to be tilting against property owners in a way that it hadn't since probably the railroad days. the railroads, and I looked for some of those old railroad cases, and it was things like people trying to get compensated for the railroad just running right across their land and putting a terminal and not compensating them. And the railroads just had such unbelievable power that came directly from act of Congress, that they could run their 200-foot right-of-way pretty much wherever they wanted, and they'd get around to compensating you when they chose to.
Did I tell you about Jim Snyder's quarter of a section of land? Jim's the only farmer in our area. And he traded some land with Montana Power or Western Energy, which was a subsidiary of Montana Power, or something, in a whole bunch of other land north of Colstrip towards the Yellowstone River. And it's a mile long and a quarter of a mile wide. And he owns it on this quarter of a section, quarter of a square mile of land. There's a railroad, a highway, an electric transmission line, an electric distribution line, two pipelines coming from the Yellowstone to Colstrip. I think one's a 36-inch, one's a 24-inch water pipeline, and an MDU gas line. He has never gotten a dime because all of those other things were approved before he acquired the land.
And the easements don't pass with the land as something that's...
I don't know if it's an easement or if it's a fee title. There's got to be easements.
Oh, yeah.
Maybe the railroad wouldn't have an easement. They must have title.
There was a case that was involving the railroad's rights, and yeah, they were actually assigned certain land by Congress, but most use of private land for any kind of government purpose is an easement that has to have negotiated terms.
I don't know what the status is of all of these, but they're all on this chunk of land that ostensibly is Jim's.
Yeah, you would have thought that at least the terms of the easements would transfer, and you would get whatever the benefit of the deal was that the previous owner had.
Well, but it was all taken care of in one shot.
Oh, they didn't get any ongoing.
No, it's a one-shot deal.
compensation
I
for
tried
the
to get an annual payment for a transmission line across our place. And they wouldn't do it.
That was part of the pipeline negotiation in North Dakota and South Dakota. There was a push for ongoing compensation because there are pump stations and there's maintenance and a lot of ongoing activity along the pipeline route and noise and potentials for spills, and the landowners wanted some kind of ongoing compensation for that. And I think it was the North Dakota PSC that just completely shot it down. I think the South Dakota PUC put a lot more conditions on the grant of the pipeline permit, and that allowed it kind of negotiated as a whole for the landowners along the route and gave them a better deal. But it can be very much at the whim of the state regulator.
Well, and a railroad has a lot more negative effects than a pipeline.
It's above ground for one thing.
Yeah.
You're not gonna miss that a single day.
Yeah, fire.
Yeah.
Railroads not only cause fire, they prevent Clint and I taking our brush pumper that the state gives us from crossing the railroad track to get to the stupid fire. You know? You can't just take one of those vehicles and cross a railroad track. You know, that's all we need is to get hung up on. So, I don't know. Weeds. You know, one of the first things we talked about is required sterile ballast. where they have to sterilize that stuff. They bring it in from Butte,
So what
Montana.
goes underneath the tracks you're talking?
Yeah, it's the little rocks.
Yeah. So eminent domain, the case that really got a lot of attention, I think it was in 2005, I looked it up a few days ago, and City of New London, Connecticut was doing a big push for urban renewal. They wanted to clear out an area near the shore. It was actually really nice real estate near the Connecticut shoreline, but a lot of old, poorly maintained houses owned by, there was a well-established low-income community there. And the case wound up before the Supreme Court because the local city government was authorizing the use of eminent domain by a private developer to clear out this neighborhood so that a new shopping and residential development could go in along the waterfront. And Kelo became the named plaintiff just as a representative of a group of people who, I think it was a woman, older woman who'd been there a long time, lived in her little fairly ramshackle house, but it was her house in her neighborhood, and she really didn't want to clear out, no matter how much money they were going to give her. It wasn't a great offer, but it was some kind of compensation. And so the challenge went all the way up through the court system, and the ultimate ruling was in favor of the City of New London. And the dissent was, I believe the dissent was written by Scalia. And it was a point where I think O'Connor was still on the court. I think O'Connor voted against it. And it was one of those 5-4 decisions and a lot of back and forth in the concurrences and the dissents. And the ruling that came down, what is the law that's arisen out of Kelo, is that a private developer may, the government may authorize a private developer to use private land, to take private land by eminent domain with proper compensation for private development purposes. Because this developer, having paid the compensation to the homeowners in the area, was going to get the entire waterfront parcel from the city for $1. So whatever was there when the whole thing, when everybody had been cleared out, the developer was going to get this fantastic sweet deal because the city was convinced that this was just going to do wonders for New London, and it would be the new London, Paris, Rome. And if you look it up today, look for what happened, the homeowners were pushed out, they lost the case, and the development never happened. The developer was unable to get financing. They'd gotten so much negative publicity. Nobody really wanted to be attached to that. They weren't sure that it was going to work, or if there might be more legal challenges.
A point needs to be made too, in this specific case, that this whole fiasco started because the federal government gave to the state of Montana some federal property, creating this whole thing. There's already been a grant on the part of the federal government to set up this whole fiasco, and yet they are taking no responsibility for kicking the big rock off the top of the mountain, starting the avalanche of unfairness by helping a private company get federal coal. You with me?
So you're following what's going on here, right? There was a land swap, and now the Otter tracts, which used to be federal land, which would more than likely never have been developed if they were still in federal hands. I don't get the sense that there was any initiative toward development until the state started
There's
talking
federal
about
coal
giving.
everywhere down there,
Yeah.
you know? But this was a grant. This was a grant to the state of Montana to do anything they want, then Montana leased it. Leased it to Arch Minerals
very
for a
favorable
pittance,
terms.
and I'm not kidding you, a pittance. 15 cents a ton.
So now Arch has partnered with Burlington Northern on the Tongue River Railroad project, and we're in
this endless process of back and forth about where they're going to go.
We go back to Bear Creek and Red Lodge too. There was a time when they opened the strip mine at Coal Strip. It was to provide steam coal for locomotives. The railroad could not mine their own coal. But Arch Minerals now owns the coal at Otter Creek, and they are going to mine that coal, and they also are part owners in the railroad. How does that work? Has the law changed?
So we've got this law that's been around for 44 years now. It's leading to it's leading to a real politicization of the judiciary. We've got that on one side. On the other hand, it's creating the process that's allowing some pushback and some recognition of impacts and alternatives that wouldn't happen any other way. So that's been the praise of NEPA. That we made a lot as a country or as states, we made a lot of environmental decisions prior to 1969 that had impacts that were unknown until after it was too late. So this is a way to at least wrap our heads around what those impacts might look like before something irretrievable has been done. But there's something about it that's not working. And I don't know where you get to a happy medium between the kind of absolute protections that have made the Endangered Species Act such a political hand grenade, and something that's so pale and procedural that it doesn't really protect anything. It requires us to spend an enormous amount of time on paperwork, but
Yeah, a black-footed ferret should not really be the tool that solves a ton of the railroad, because it is such a horrible mistake to begin with. It should not be left up to a black-footed ferret to set up home housekeeping, or a grizzly bear.
well, so we talked about the Endangered Species Act last week,
Did we?
and the enormous controversies, and nobody knows as well as Montanans and probably people from Wyoming how controversial this has been. But that's the most powerful federal environmental law. You have an endangered species, that's an absolutely critical. Habitat must be protected, the species must be preserved. You cannot take an action that will destroy the habitat or decimate the species.
One of your cohorts called me one time, the college girl from Georgia, and she said, I was given your name and understand that you're a livestock rancher in Montana, is that correct? In her sweet little southern accent. I said, yep, that's right. She said, I have also been led to believe that you are an extremely opinionated person. I said, that's true too. And she said, well, I am doing a college paper on the controversy surrounding the reintroduction of the gray wolf into the greater Yellowstone ecosystem. Do you have an opinion on that? And I said, sweetheart, I have opinions on things I've never even heard of. And she said, and what is your opinion on the reintroduction of the gray wolf into the greater Yellowstone ecosystem? And I said, my idea is that anybody who has a strong opinion, either way, on the reintroduction of the gray wolf into the greater Yellowstone ecosystem is wrong. And so then I had to explain to her how everybody is going off the lunatic fringe on something that's really not that important, I'd much rather be upset about a prairie dog than a coyote or a wolf, And I think if you're a rancher, that's one of the things that you have to cope with. I don't know, maybe I'm wrong. A lot of the people that got burned out in the fire down there went to FEMA and got paid to fix their fences. I don't believe in that. I don't believe in using the government. We didn't collect a dime, and we've got lots of fences to fix. But I think that it's our responsibility to repair that.
You're so quiet tonight. Are you sleepy?
I was going to say that about your case. I've heard that that's the best way to get a project squashed, is just to find an endangered species.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
So why, I'm just curious if, I noticed that there's bald eagle and, what was the other one, black-footed ferret?
Ferrets in there.
So why can't you use that? And just,
There aren't any. They haven't survived.
Well, bald eagles are recovered, so we can't use those. And they're doing some ferret reintroductions now,
Oh, yeah.
aren't they? But I don't think
They haven't taken,
there's-
really.
Yeah.
Reintroduction of bison.
sage grouse.
Oh,
it's a whole other conversation.
That's a whole nother conversation.
That's a 3-hour class right there.
Just to advise that.
I was hoping to bring that guy in, the bison guy from the American Bird Reserve.
I understand the message.
I did my Yellowstone.
No, that's all paranoia too, on both sides. I mean, it's an,
Well, so questions about the NEPA process or about that court case?
So with the scoping process, if there's enough people that are not for the railroad, couldn't that also get that project squashed somewhat? Throughout the scoping process, if the people don't want it.
There have been some big crowds at these scoping meetings, and it just seems sometimes like they're just making hash marks on a piece of paper. It doesn't seem to influence the decision making. If a big crowd shows up or nobody shows up, they're just going through the steps. They've had their hearing, they've taken comments, that's what they were supposed to do, and now they move on to the next step.
Yeah, it doesn't seem like the individual gets a whole lot of time to speak or get a foothold in the scoping argument at all. They basically say, well, we'll sign your name down on a piece of paper, you can talk for 5 minutes and then you're done.
Yeah, and it often is a really short timeline. And I've been in hearings where they've announced in advance, we're going to give each person 3 minutes or 5 minutes. And so people have gotten together and written up a really detailed set of comments and just passed it along. So that the next person just stands up and reads the next 3 minutes.
Let me read you what I wrote after the scoping on the Tumbler River. This is to Ken Blodgett,
Who is?
Surface Transportation Board, Washington, D.C. Dear Mr. Blodgett, during the verbal introduction comments at the scoping meetings, the proposed Tumbler River Railroad was described as a railroad extending from Miles City to 2 terminal points in the Ashland area, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. There is always a tendency for the permitting agency to perhaps inadvertently infer that approval is merely a matter of jumping through all of the hoops posed by NEPA. Evidence of this expected approval can be observed by the people and their comments at hearings that I attended. The opposition by both a number of comments against the approval of the railroad and the vast number of persons testifying in opposition was revealing. Supporters of the granting of the certificate for the construction and operation of the Tumbler Railroad obviously felt that their comments were unneeded, while the opponents hoped by their comments would at least give pause to the tendency for almost universal, preconceived, automatic approval. I feel that the second paragraph in the introduction for the draft scoping document is quite revealing of the inherent bias we frequently see in documents of this type. Who knows what the, quote, anticipated train traffic, unquote, will be? What is the supporting documentation that led to the number of 3.7 loaded unit coal trains per day, or 26 round trips per week? The inference is that this is a done deal. It's quite obvious. There were no proponents of the railroad that testified. They don't have to. They assume that they're going to get their way.
This has been going on for how long?
ever. I was young when it started.
I feel like at the beginning you said 30 years. 20,
Well, that, your first EIS, the first final EIS is still floating around. It's 85. They finalized the first NEPA process.
I was.
Yeah, that's a couple of years. The draft came out in 83, so it probably, the original proposal might have been 81.
Don't ask me any dates, ever.
We'll just make them up. There's no.
I was a young man.
But because it's not been exactly the same proposal, it's been this shape-shifting thing where the mine we're talking about moves a few miles up the road and the route shifts a little bit across the map. And the map that you're passing around is of the current preferred alternative.
I can't find it, it's kind of a confusing map.
Yeah.
It's like, to make
Really
this
find the
map.
actual railroad.
They need to take a mapping techniques class, to understand. It's definitely not an easy
The
map to
railroad's
read.
actually not drawn on it, is it?
No,
So it's.
it's here. This is now the preferred route. As far as this.
You want to, yeah, show them where we're.
Oh.
We actually, we
Roll it up
can
and
put that
there
out
you go.
here and project it, I think.
No, this is only, this is just a little bit of it.
Let's see if this actually works. Never had to try this. Okay, you go. You drive.
Well,
It's very glossy. You want it down this part?
Can you move the lights?
Yeah, you can move those.
Oh, yeah, that would help.
I'm lost and so forth. There, that's where we need to be, right there.
Oh, there we go.
Okay, this is north, this is south, the mine is way, way down here. This is Tongue River. And initially, the railroad was going to go, it's on the east side because the west side of the Tongue River goes across the Northern Cheyenne Reservation, and they do not want to cross a reservation. They run into all kinds of other problems if they cross a reservation. So they kept it on the east side of the river. Ashland is on the reservation, so it comes down in this country, and they had it right along Tongue River, all the way down to right here. It crosses Tongue River. This is going to Miles City. This is what it was initially. Came down here, and they had a bridge across Tongue River right here. This is our land, this is our land, this is our land, and that's where the 4 miles would have been. Here's, there's a mile. So there was a bridge across here, and it went on down following roughly this road all the way to Miles City. They abandoned that. They had the scoping, that's where all of the scoping was about that route. As soon as the scoping was over with, they said, no, we have a new alternate route. And now it's the preferred route, and that's going to Coldstream.
Wally, was that because of the fishery?
Huh?
Was that because of the fishery at Miles City and the pallid sturgeon and all that?
Yeah, a lot of it.
So there was an endangered
It's
species
also a
issue.
much shorter route to go to Coldstream.
Yeah. Unless you're taking your coal east.
Yeah, and also, it's shorter to go west to go to Coldstream. So there's several reasons. You
Yeah.
know, the fish hatchery was one. Maybe the livestock experiment station was another, even though they had permission to cross it. There's more state land that they cross going down here, which is an obstacle. So then they changed. The railroad is still coming
And, well,
down
and I think
here.
that's interesting too. The state land is an obstacle
Oh, sure.
because
Oh, yeah.
the state has high standards.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, we asked for the same conditions when they came in and were doing the surveying on our land that they got on state land. He said, oh, no.
Yeah.
No, we start fresh when we get on.
We're not giving you that kind of deal.
No. So the railroad comes here. This is all an Amish community, okay? They really don't want to cross the Amish either because they're kind of cute and charming and sexy. No, seriously, I mean, and the guy who has the land over here is a Swiss banker, and they wish to hell they didn't have to cross him either because he's got all kinds of money, you know? So they come down here. Maybe what they had originally planned was to go between these two Amish houses and hook up and go here, turn, and go to Colstrip. This is our land. We're just in the process of buying this, and we trade for this, and this is the country that burned. All of this country, everything here burned. And that's where they were doing a lot of their wildlife stuff. So anyway.
And then up here, there
It
are a
goes
lot
off.
of people involved in this, and you get a little sense from looking at the parcels that are drawn out here. It's too small for you to see that there are landowner names on here, but all these little white boxes represent different land holdings.
But they won't be crossed by the railroad. Like Roger?
Yeah, so that'd be here, that's Roger's.
No.
Well, that says Roger.
No, they're all off the map over here. None of these will be crossed. You don't have the part of the map that hooks onto here.
Well, this is, the Colstrip alternative comes up this way, doesn't it?
No, this is it right here.
And then what is this?
Mm. Genie line, this is the Rosewood Creek Road. This is where we live, right over in here.
Well, so there's that big Peabody parcel, there's Roger 6.
That's us.
Island 9.
That's not right.
Yeah.
Oh, maybe. I don't think so. That's not Highland Rim. That's Scotland Rim.
Yeah, Scott is Highland Rim.
Yeah, but that isn't his line.
Oh.
Felton Angus. Rim.
Like right where the bathrooms are. You go this way, there's a wall.
You know what I'm talking
Yeah,
about?
it's a theater auditorium.
Yes.
Idea.
Where's that at? It's on one of the pillars. Well, it's not full.
Is it possible?
What's been downstairs during my
I don't have this figure. This looks like Colstrip, doesn't it? So this hooks on. This hooks on and it goes here. This is the route. This is the rest of it.
Yeah, that's
Right.
what I thought.
Yeah.
Because this is a much larger scale, right? And this is just the inset?
Yep.
Okay, good. I'm not crazy today.
Yeah, because this is all the Amish, and
Yeah.
I still don't understand the Highland Rim.
Okay, I think we have determination. This is the route.
The proposed alternative route? Or the?
Colstrip alternative?
What?
This is the Colstrip alternative up through here?
Yeah, and the Colstrip alternative hooks onto that one and goes right through here and onto Colstrip, which is right
Yeah.
up there.
just up there in the corner. So this is a much bigger scale than what you
Yeah.
saw down below. This is more like the detail
It's like Ashland.
of the area down around the Amish. And then this gives you a look at the overland route that would go up to Colstrip.
That's from Ashland to Colstrip, right?
So Ashland would be on this, on the bigger map, Ashland would be off this direction.
Oh,
No. Oh, on the bigger map?
Yeah, on this, Ashland would be off to the west.
No, it should be south. See, it's on the river, so it should be down here somewhere.
Okay. Well, my plan for the evening is to let us have some time to talk with Wally and get him on the road before it's too terribly late. He's got to drive back out to Rosebud County. Can I get to
I'm very excited about that.
Oh, I'm excited. I rate it.
Oh.
Oh, it's all gonna happen. So.
We have a substitute next week.
Yeah, but then there's just gonna be more writing, signing more exam and stuff.
Speaking of next week, we are scheduled to, don't hate me regarding foods, but we are scheduled to have our topics turned in for our second assignment. Is that still on?
Yeah, I think I'll just go ahead and put the Dropbox folder.
Thank you so much for bringing that up.
You're welcome.
Sorry
about
that.
I apologize in advance.
So, yeah, I'll put the Dropbox folder up and we can get those in. Because it's just, if you put something off, then you just have two things to turn in.
Am I dismissed?
Well, other
Any
questions?
Anybody have any?
So are you from Colstrip then, or are you from kind of in between?
You know, that's always a great conversation starter. Where are you from? No, I'm not from anywhere, except EOB. Our address is Forsyth, but there are 6 post offices that are closer to where we live than Forsyth. And the closest is Colstrip. But I am not claimed as a member of them because I've been an activist in a whole lot of other areas for years. I went to a school board meeting the other night, and I didn't know a person in the room. Hardly. I knew a few teachers, but there was not one long-term resident. And Colstrip was a boom town once. When I was in high school, it was the largest strip mine in the world, and we were so proud of that fact because it was providing all of the coal for the whole northern Pacific Railroad. And the day they brought the diesel locomotive in to haul the coal away, everybody thought, "Oh, this is just an aberration. Colstrip will be here forever," and it died. There were 2 employees left in town just to kind of maintain it. It became a retirement community.
Where are they coming from now if it's all new people? Are they with the power plant?
When they were building the power plants, they were from everywhere. It was just like the Bakken. It was, and of course, our taxes didn't go up until the things were completed. We had another interesting legal thing too. They were building units 1 and 2, and we had a kind of a weak law at the time that said if you're going to build a potentially polluting facility in the state of Montana, you have to have a permit of some kind. And so we went to the local district judge and said they're building 2 coal-fired power plants. They're starting to pour footings and iron up. And they don't have a permit. And we think that's going to be a potentially polluting facility, and they have to have a permit to do that.
I'm going to ask you what year that was, and then I didn't.
70 something.
Okay. So early clearing up the place.
And the Montana Power Company hired a lawyer, contended, well, yeah, we'll get a permit, but we don't really need one until we put in either something that might pollute or the devices that will cut the pollution as much as is technologically feasible. Maybe that's when we have to have a permit. We said, no. If we are going to put a feedlot in that crosses Tunger, that the cows can walk across and poop in the river, we have to have a permit, don't we? Yeah. Said, when do we need a permit? The state said, before you dig the first post hole. We said, okay. They're digging the first post hole for the power plant, so they have to have a permit, right? And Judge Cope agreed with us. He found for the plaintiffs. And then he said, but I will probably be reversed by a higher court, and they're probably going to be built anyway, and Montana Power will be able to claim that the delay has cost them a lot of money, so I will fine for the plaintiffs, but the plaintiffs are required to put up a $60 million bond. So I don't like you lawyers, see? See how you work?
That was a judge. A lawyer was representing you in this, right? Who was your lawyer now?
Frank Camphy. Frank Camphy dug a great big deep hole with his airplane.
Oh. Yeah, that's why I don't fly anymore. My kids want to see me for a few more years.
But I keep telling Carrie that I'm old and my mental faculties are failing, and physically I'm getting worse. I quit smoking, now I'm getting too fat. And so I need to lose some weight. And I want to keep fighting this railroad, but I don't know how to do it for sure. But I have a plan that I will act of civil disobedience, where I may shoot somebody in the knee or something like that and be incarcerated, put in jail. And I will get a white robe, I'll wrap myself in, and I'll assume a lotus position and have Mahatma Gandhi as my ideal.
You take monkey
And
wrenching to
prison
one
food is lousy, and I will lose weight, and I will become a martyr to the cause. If you don't win, that's what I'm facing. It's on you.
No pressure. Believe the number of clients I have who begin conversations with, when can I start shooting?
Never.
This is long enough. The only answer to that is I don't do criminal, so maybe you shoot somebody I can't do. Thank you so much, Wally. Good day.
Well, thank you guys for putting up with me. And it was so moved, after this course, to go do something about the inequities that you heard about trying to work with.
You gotta make sure you make off with my file. Yeah, you're making off with my file. People writing assignments and being unhappy. Oh, but I've got your letter to Karen. You just did not the coffee.
Is that all this money?
Maybe about this class.
Yes, yes, I think so.
This is for allergen.
I was gonna give you some stuff, but I won't.
It's birthday? Okay, I'm not sure.
I think as long as we can get you available, I guess aside from martyrdom, that's what it sounds like.
Just go to the real ones now. Like me, apparently I was intervention.
Well, I mean, I'm like, I'm sure or something.
Senior project. She's Doug's daughter in college.
You know, those were hard. I mean, they were, they made your arms feel
Yeah, I am not too. I never talked to real people.
they were wrong. It was like a little pinch, and you just need them every once in a while. But
Good to see you.
Thanks, Wally. Thank you.
Oh, if you encourage him, at least you will.
Yeah, do one.
Who's been to Colstrip? For those of you that haven't, I'll take you on a tour of what should be my hometown. My wife and I did a bunch of estate planning, and we talked to a lawyer, and we wrote wills and set up trusts and all this sort of followed all. And they finished, and he said, we said, is that it? And he said, no. Now you have to take care of those things that have no monetary value, but they have sentimental value. Things that don't measure up economically. But those are the things that family members after a death fight with. Those things of intrinsic value. There's no perfect word in English. Things of intrinsic value. Well, value is a hard word to rhyme, so I use intrinsic worth on my tour of Colstrip. So, here you go. Things of intrinsic worth. Remember that sandrock on Envt'l Creek where my dad carved his name in 13? It's been blasted down in a rut and carried by a dragline machine. And where Phelan's lived at the old Myler place, where us kids sold nuns one night, they dozed it up in a funeral pyre and torched it. It's gone. The sea on the hill and the water tanks are now classified reclaimed land. They're thinking of building a golf course out there for the old family. The old Egan homestead's a national, but they say it is 80 feet deep. And the branding trail at the Federalist camp is underneath the spoil heap. And across the creek is the temple now where they load coal onto the train. And the May West rock on Hay Coulee, just black and white snapshots remain. There's a railroad loop and a coal storage shed where the bison kill site used to be. The guy place is gone. Ambrose's too. And Beulah Farley's a ranch refugee. But things are booming. We've got this new school that's envied across the whole state. And when folks up and ask, how's things going down there? Hale Lodge grin like a fool and say, great God, how we're rolling in dough as they tear and they ravage the earth. And nobody knows. Or nobody cares.